The mail came on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday was the day I always watered the begonias on the front porch, the ones my husband Bernard planted the spring before he died. 7 years of watering those same plants. 7 years of standing on that same porch in my housecoat with a green plastic watering can, watching the neighborhood wake up. It had become my ritual, my proof that life was still moving forward in a quiet, manageable way. The envelope was from the county tax assessor's office. I almost didn't open it. I thought it was the usual annual notice, the one I filed away in my oak cabinet without much thought. The same cabinet where I kept every document related to this house since Bernard and I bought it in 1987. I opened it standing right there on the porch, watering can still in my hand. Property owner of record, Hargrove Capital Holdings, LLC. I read it 3 times. Then I sat down on the porch step, right there in my housecoat, and I read it again. My name was not on it. The house I had lived in for 36 years. The house where I raised 2 children. The house where I still slept in. The same bedroom with the same floral wallpaper. Bernard and I had picked out together at a store that had long since closed. That house was no longer listed as mine. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't panic. Not yet. It was something stranger than panic. It was the specific confusion of a person who is looking at something that cannot be real, trying to find the error, certain the error exists. I went inside, put the kettle on, and called my son. He didn't answer. I called my daughter-in-law. She picked up on the second ring, and I could hear something in her voice before I even said a word. A kind of readiness, like she had been waiting for this call. Vivienne, I said, I just received a tax notice, and my name isn't on it. Do you know anything about this? There was a pause. 3, maybe 4 seconds. Long enough. Mom, she said, we were going to talk to you this weekend. My son Philip had always been careful with money. That was how I used to describe it. Careful. He tracked expenses, compared prices, researched purchases for months before making them. When he married Vivienne 8 years ago, she brought the same precision. Together, they were a household of spreadsheets and projections. I had thought that was a good thing. Philip called me back 20 minutes after I hung up with his wife. His voice was measured in that particular way it got when he had rehearsed what he was going to say. Mom, the house was in probate limbo, he told me. When Dad passed, the title wasn't transferred correctly. There were liens we didn't know about. Vivienne's cousin works in real estate law, and he found a way to restructure the ownership to protect the asset. It's still in the family. Nothing has changed. My name isn't on the tax notice, I said. That's because the LLC holds it now. It's a protection structure. It's still yours, Mom. We did this for you. I was 68 years old, and I had not been born yesterday. But I also loved my son, and I wanted to believe him. That is the part I am least proud of. Not that I was deceived, but that I chose, for a few days, to let myself be. I asked him to send me documentation. He said he would. That weekend came and went. Then another. Each time I brought it up, there was a reason the paperwork wasn't ready. The cousin was traveling. The filing was still processing. Just a little longer, Mom. 3 weeks after that tax notice arrived, I came home from my Thursday morning water evokes class to find a lockbox on my front door. There was a business card attached to it. A real estate agent, someone I had never heard of. A company called Meridian Property Group. The lockbox was the kind agents use for showings. I stood there in my wet swimsuit, gym bag over my shoulder, staring at a lockbox on my own front door. I still had my key. The lockbox didn't prevent me from entering. I went inside and I walked through every room slowly. Nothing was missing yet. My photos were on the walls. Bernard's reading chair was still by the window. The begonias were visible through the front glass. Everything looked exactly as it always had, but the house had been listed. I found it that evening on a real estate website. My home, my address, interior photos taken without my knowledge. The listing said it was vacant. I was not vacant. I was standing in the kitchen reading about myself. I called Philip. He didn't answer. I called Vivian. She didn't answer. I called Philip's number 4 more times that night and sent 2 text messages, both of which showed as delivered and were not replied to. I did not sleep that night. I sat in Bernard's chair, and I tried to think clearly, which is harder than people make it sound when you are frightened and alone at 11 o'clock at night, and the person you are frightened of is your own child. By morning, I had made a list. I have always been a list person. Bernard used to tease me about it, said I made lists of my lists. But lists are how I think, how I organize, how I stop a problem from becoming a fog and turn it into something with edges. My list that morning had 4 items. First, do not touch or move anything in this house. Second, find out exactly what was filed and when. Third, talk to someone who knows property law. Fourth, do not tell Philip I am doing any of this. I had a neighbor, a retired school teacher named Opal, who had lived next door for 22 years. Opal was the kind of person who knew everyone and remembered everything. She was also, as it happened, the mother of a man who had practiced real estate law in the county for 15 years before recently moving to estate litigation. I knocked on her door at 8:30 that morning. She took one look at my face and put the coffee on. I showed her the tax notice. I showed her the listing on my phone. I told her about the calls to Philip, the LLC, the cousin in real estate law. Opal was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm calling my son." His name was Terrence, and he was in my kitchen by 10:30 that same morning. Terrence did not make me feel foolish. That mattered more than I can say. He asked me questions in the same tone you'd use to discuss a recipe. Calm, interested, methodical. He took notes on a yellow legal pad, and he did not once look at me with pity. He explained what had likely happened, a quitclaim deed, filed without my full understanding of what I was signing. He asked if I had ever signed anything related to the house in the last 2 years, anything at all. I thought about it. There had been something Philip had brought over 18 months ago. He said it was a refinancing form, something to reduce my interest rate. It would save me money every month. He had stood beside me at the kitchen table while I signed. It hadn't taken 5 minutes. Terrence wrote that down carefully. He said we would need to pull the county recorder's records, check the chain of title, look at the deed filings. He said if what I suspected was accurate, we had grounds for fraud and elder financial abuse, and that the statute was clear. He said it in the same tone as everything else, quiet, precise, certain. I asked him what I should do in the meantime. He said, "Stay in your house. Do not leave voluntarily for any reason. If anyone comes to the door claiming rights to the property, do not engage. Call me immediately." I said, "My son may come." Terrence looked at me steadily. "Especially then," he said. Philip came 4 days later. He came on a Saturday morning, and he brought Vivian, and they both had the careful, arranged faces of people who have rehearsed something difficult. He started with the word mom in a tone I recognized from when he was a teenager and needed something. Then he said the house was in a complicated legal situation and that it would be easiest for everyone if I would consider staying at their place for a little while. Just until things were sorted out, it would be comfortable. They had the guest room. "No," I said. He seemed surprised. Philip was used to a mother who softened things, who looked for the middle ground, who chose peace over confrontation. That woman still existed inside me, but she was standing behind the woman who had read that tax notice on the porch. "Mom, we're not asking you to leave permanently." "I know what you're asking," I said, "and no." Vivienne touched his arm. Something passed between them that I was not meant to see. They left 40 minutes later. The showing that had been scheduled for the following Tuesday was canceled. I found that out from the listing, which I had been checking every day. Terrence filed the initial paperwork the following week. What happened next took months. I want to be honest about that because in these kinds of stories, people sometimes skip past the months, and the months are the part that is hardest to describe. There were days I sat in Bernard's chair and questioned everything. Not just Philip's intentions, but my own memory. Had I understood what I was signing? Had I missed something I should have caught? Had I been naive in ways that an older person is not supposed to admit? At 68, I had become the person I once read about in newspaper articles. The one you feel sorry for, the one who didn't see it coming. But I kept going to water aerobics on Thursdays. I kept watering the begonias on Tuesdays. I kept having coffee with Opal. I kept the list. Terrence found what he needed in the county records. The deed had been transferred via a quitclaim I signed in Philip's kitchen. I remembered the visit now. I thought it was an insurance form. Vivian had brought out tea, and then transferred again 6 weeks later to Hargrove Capital Holdings, an LLC registered in Delaware with Vivian's father as the sole listed officer. Vivian's father, not the cousin. Not a family protection structure. Terrence had also located a listing contract signed 4 months before I received that tax notice. 4 months, while I was having Thanksgiving at their house. While I helped Vivian assemble the cranberry salad she made every year. While Philip and I stood on their back porch after dinner and talked about whether my knee pain warranted seeing a specialist. I don't tell you this to be dramatic. I tell you because I think it is important to understand the specific texture of that kind of betrayal. Not the dramatic movie version, but the real version, which is made of cranberry salad and back porch conversations and the way your son looks at you when he's lying and you can't tell. The court date was set for a Thursday morning. I wore my navy dress, the one I had bought for my niece's college graduation 3 years ago. I had my folder with me. Every document Terrence had prepared, every piece of correspondence, the listing records, the recorded deed transfers, the original 1987 purchase documents that I had kept in my oak cabinet all these years. I had also, the week prior, written down everything I could remember about the day I signed that form at Philip's kitchen table. The time of day, what I had been wearing, what Vivian served with the tea, the exact words Philip had used to describe what I was signing. Terrence said it was one of the most detailed personal accounts he'd seen in 30 years of practice. I told him I had always been a list person. Philip and Vivian were there with their own attorney, a man in a gray suit who kept checking his phone. Vivian's father was not present. I hadn't expected him to be. I did not look at Philip during the proceedings. Not because I couldn't bear to, but because I had decided that whatever was on his face, whether it was shame or resentment or the arranged neutrality of a man who had convinced himself he was justified, was not information I needed. I had all the information I needed. It was in my folder. The judge reviewed the evidence. She was a compact woman in her late 50s with reading glasses and a manner that reminded me of the principal at the school where I had worked for 21 years. Careful, unhurried, genuinely listening. She asked questions of both attorneys. She looked at the deed transfer timeline. She ruled in my favor. The quitclaim was voided. The LLC's claim on the property was dissolved. Title reverted to my name. She also ordered a review for elder financial exploitation under state statute, which meant the matter was referred to the county prosecutor's office for further consideration. I sat very still when she read the ruling. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I had expected to cry. I did not attend the sentencing hearing when it came, 4 months later. Terrence called to tell me the outcome, and I thanked him, and we talked for a few minutes about Opal, who had recently taken up pickleball and was apparently formidably good at it. I had been asked, at various points during the process, whether I wanted to make a statement, whether I wanted Philip to know, in formal recorded terms, what this had cost me. I decided against it. People sometimes ask me why. They expect me to say something about forgiveness or exhaustion or closure, but that is not exactly why. The truth is that I had already said what needed to be said. I had said it standing in my front hallway on a Saturday morning when Philip tried to move me out of my own home, and I said one word, no. I had said it every Tuesday when I watered the begonias. I had said it in the county records office when I stood at the counter and asked for everything they had. I had said it in a navy dress in a courtroom with a folder full of 36 years of documentation. A formal statement would have been for his benefit, not mine. He would have gotten to see my pain. He would have gotten to be present at the moment I bled. And that was not something I was willing to give him. I walked out of that building on my own 2 feet, and I drove myself home, and I made a cup of tea, and I sat in Bernard's chair, and I looked out at the begonias, which were doing quite well that year. I am 70 years old now. I have outlasted a fraud, a court proceeding, and whatever it was that passed for a mother-son relationship during those 18 months. I still live in the house on Carver Street that Bernard and I bought in 1987. I still water the begonias on Tuesday mornings. I still have coffee with Opal, who is, as I mentioned, absolutely demolishing people at pickleball. There is a document in my oak cabinet next to the original 1987 purchase agreement that I prepared with Terrence after everything was resolved. It outlines, in plain language, every account I hold, every document related to this property, and the name of the attorney to be contacted in the event that anyone attempts to alter those arrangements without my direct written consent, notarized, in my own hand, in my right mind. I know my own mind. That is what I want you to take from this. Not the legal outcome, not the judgment, not any of the details that made it dramatic. Just that. I spent 68 years building a life with clear eyes, and I was not about to stop because my son underestimated me. I had signed things I did not fully understand, and that was real, and I carry it. But I had also kept every document, remembered every conversation, written down every detail, and shown up on a Tuesday morning to water my own begonias. That is who I am. That is who I have always been. And that, in the end, was exactly enough. I have thought a lot about what made any of this possible. Not the fraud itself. I understand how that worked. The mechanics of it. The quitclaim and the LLC and Vivian's father, whose name I still cannot say without something tightening in my chest. I understand the how. What I think about more is the why it worked as long as it did. And the answer, when I am honest, is that I let it. Not because I was foolish. Because I loved my son, and love, when it is aimed at someone who has decided to use it against you, becomes a kind of blindness you choose because the alternative, seeing clearly, is almost too painful to survive. I signed that form at his kitchen table, and I told myself it was what he said it was, not because I believed him entirely, but because I needed to. That is the part that costs me the most when I turn it over in my mind. What I know now is this. The moment I stopped needing his version of events to be true was the moment I became capable of doing something about it. I sat in Bernard's chair that first sleepless night, and I made a list, and that list was the first honest thing I had done in 18 months. It was small. 4 items. But it belonged entirely to me, and no one had approved it, and no one had shaped it, and that mattered in a way I cannot fully explain except to say it felt like stepping back into my own body. Philip made a choice. He made it over a period of months, in increments, each one small enough to seem almost reasonable. The form at the kitchen table, the reassurances about the LLC, the conversations timed carefully around holidays and dinners. He had been counting on the fact that I would keep choosing love over clarity. And for a while, he was right. But there is a version of a person that exists underneath all the accommodating and the softening and the choosing not to see. And when you take enough from her, she eventually stands up. What he could not account for was that I had kept everything. 36 years of documentation in an oak cabinet. A neighbor whose son practiced exactly the kind of law I needed. A habit of writing things down. None of those things were accidents. They were the accumulated result of living carefully and attentively for 7 decades, of being the kind of person who pays attention and does not throw things away. That is what I mean when I say that character is not a single dramatic moment. It is Tuesday morning with a watering can. It is the label maker and the file folders and the habit of remembering. It is the slow, quiet, entirely unglamorous practice of being someone who takes their own life seriously enough to document it. Vivian's father is facing a separate civil proceeding. Philip and I have not spoken since the ruling. I do not know if that will change. I have stopped trying to decide in advance how I will feel about it when the time comes. What I do know is that I walked out of that courthouse in my navy dress, and I drove myself home, and I made tea, and I sat in the chair by the window, and the begonias were right where I left them, and the oak cabinet was right where it had always been, and the document with Terrence's name on it was inside it, and my name was on the deed. That is enough. That has always been enough. I just had to be willing to fight for it.